let's go back in the record. So we have set up. Ms. Blair, are you able to see your attorney from where you are? Can you see your attorney? Can you see? You have to speak up loud.
Yeah.
All right, Ms. Blair, we're going to have you sworn in first, so can you stand up? And I don't know if you can see the court officer that she's going to swear you in.
I see her.
Swear or affirm that the testimony that you're about to give is the truth?
Yes.
Please state your name for the record.
Mitchelle Blair.
If you can't hear Ms. Blair, let us know, okay?
Is there any way you can turn the volume up on your end, because I have to keep leaning down into the speaker to be heard?
Let me turn her volume up. We have her volume. Is there a way you can turn her volume? That's her volume. That's Ms. Blair's volume.
Are you saying you cannot hear us, Mitchelle?
No, I can hear you fine. I'm saying, can you turn it up so you guys can hear me, because I have to keep leaning down so you can hear me properly.
We have her volume up almost all the way.
Okay.
It's all the way up.
From where you are right now, just don't lean forward, lean back, sit up straight. Now just speak normally.
Can you hear me good?
I can hear you. Okay?
Okay. Okay.
Just for the record, state your name again, Ms. Blair.
Mitchelle Blair.
Okay. And do you understand the hearing that we're in right now?
Yes.
And what type of hearing is it?
My client stepped out and co-filed.
Mr. Wilson, need to
Need to confirm that with my client.
Let's go.
Not for most sections.
Thank you. I'll repeat the question. Do you understand the nature of the hearing we're in, Ms. Blair?
Yes, I do.
And what is your understanding of this hearing?
To place the children in the best possible environment, period, and permanently.
Okay. Now you understand, if you heard the testimony of Dr. Henry, that was this morning, correct?
Yes.
And you understand that the recommendation is for the termination of your parental rights?
As it should be. I have never even had a desire to fight for my rights. I understand everything I've done. I've never denied anything. My rights should be taken. What I have been fighting for, and the only thing I've ever cared about,
Michelle,
is their rights.
let me ask you a question, okay? I understand your anxious to get your testimony out, but I have to do it by question and answer, okay?
Okay.
Now, through the trial and earlier, there's been an allegation that you prevented both of the fathers, Mr. Dorsey and Mr. Berry, from visiting. Is that true?
That's a total lie. I never prevented either of them from coming to see them. That was, they were ridiculous.
Let's start with Mr. Dorsey. He is Gabrielle's father, correct?
Yes.
And did he ever live with you and Gabrielle?
Ever. And that was his big problem also in the beginning of why he disappeared in the first place.
When did he first disappear?
I want to say when I moved out, Alexander Dorsey was so pissed that I wouldn't let him move in with me. He didn't come see Gabi, and she was a baby. Gabi was only 9 months old. He didn't come see Gabi for months. Months and months. Why? He couldn't understand the fact I did not want to be with him. I never stopped him from seeing her, though.
Okay. Did you place any type of limitations on his parenting time?
Never. I'm the one that used to call them.
Well, let's just, so that we can keep it straight. Right now, all my questions are being directed towards Mr. Dorsey, okay?
Okay.
So, did you ever place any limits whatsoever on his parenting time?
No.
And let's start after 2005. What was Mr. Dorsey's visitation?
People over there, they started coming to get the kids. It would always be me having to initiate it. I would ask Gabi and Stoney, do you want to go over there? If they said yes, I called them. He'd always have some excuse, oh, I don't have gas. When you started saying you don't have gas, I got someone, my neighbor, or I would give them gas to get the kids over there.
So how often? How often would you say that Mr. Dorsey visited with Stoney and Gabrielle?
If you go over there, I want to say, at one point, it was actually every weekend. I would have them go over there. I would actually take them over there every weekend. Like I said, I would have to initiate it. He would try to back out saying, oh, I got to do this, I got to do that. I bring them anyway. I'm saying if they want to see you, what's the problem? You get what I'm saying? I've always tried to initiate that. He couldn't understand.
Give us a time frame for that. How old was Gabrielle?
What do you mean?
How old was Gabrielle at that time?
I think she was 8.
Okay. Within, let's bring it closer. Within the last, say, 4 years, how often did Mr. Dorsey visit?
Did you say 4 years?
Within the last 3 to 4 years.
It was crap. It was crap. And actually, from 08, 09, and 2010, Alexander Dorsey didn't see them at all. We were only like 20 minutes away from each other. I would call, oh, Duke not here, Duke not here. And it was always crap. So I just got tired of trying, and I just stopped. We would always have to be the ones initiating. At one point, I even stopped calling and told Gabi, if you want to see him, you call. She got to run around. So we just stopped. You know what I mean? But when he finally popped back up, I never kept him away. My door was always open. There were never porch visits.
When you said he popped back up, when did that take place?
The first time he popped back up, I want to say in 2011, I forget around what time, whether it was summer, spring, or whatever, but he just showed up. And I'm like, so you realize they not dead, they alive, right? That's what I always used to say to him. Everybody could be dead, you wouldn't even know it. That's kind of ironic in light of what happened, but that's what I always said. You don't know what's going on with nobody over here. You care about us, but we argued, but he came in the house. And what I would do was either go upstairs, go in the back room. He talked to the girls for a second, and then he just has to just gravitate to where I am. And it's like, you don't even come over to see them. You come to see what I'm doing. It's like, I don't want to be bothered with him. So that's what when we get into arguments when he came over. You can never just fixate on the kids. You always got to come around me. And I'm saying, talk to the kids, stay the hell out of my face.
Did Mr. Dorsey ever provide you any type of support, monetary or otherwise?
At one point, I think for a year straight, it was child support being paid. that was for a year. Out of all the years they were alive, that was for a year. Now, when they say...
Was that through the friend of the court or direct to you?
The friends of the court. And at that time, we hadn't even seen Alexander Dorsey. All of a sudden, it was just, I'm looking like, what is this? You get what I'm saying? It was child support in the mail, and I'm like, oh, he must be working. We wasn't even seeing him at that time, so that was a surprise to me. And I actually went over there to tell him thank you, because I didn't know how that worked with the child support. I actually didn't put that on him. The FIA did. So I actually went over there to thank him. You get what I'm saying? So it was, they just blamed me for everything, and it's like it's an easy scapegoat for them.
Now, you indicated in terms of, you mentioned the porch visit. Did Mr. Dorsey visit by coming and visiting with Gabrielle on the porch of your home?
No, they did not. And that's the main reason why I wanted Gabi to be called. But once I heard she was nervous, I wasn't going to do that to her and make her get on the stand. But she could also verify that. But there were never any porch visits. That don't even sound right. Who would sit on the porch for an hour? Alexander Dorsey's ex-girlfriend, she said there were years of porch visits. First off, the last time she's ever seen them was in 2006. You get what I'm saying? 2006. So everybody's going to stand lying. There were never any porch visits.
Okay. Now, what about Mr. Berry? What was his parenting time schedule, if there was one?
There was never a parenting time schedule. Stephen also disappeared, but his was just like, Stephen will come around, like for, let's say, 3 days, 3 to 4 days, and then you don't see him again for 7, 8, 9 months. Then he pop back up, and it's like, what the, you get what I'm saying? He just comes back like, I remember he came to the door one day, one of the kids let him in, he talking about daddy's home. Like it's a joke or something. You get what I'm saying?
Miss Blair, the time, give us the time frame of when you're describing this. When did this happen?
This has been all, okay, when we first had Stephen, even before Stephen, it was like, before we had the kids, he was always there. When it was just us, me, Gabi, Stoney, and him, he was always there. After Stephen came, I want to say he left 3 months later. He never got up. He never did anything for Stephen, never did anything. Never got up in the middle of the night, never did anything. One of his friends knocked on the door at 12 o'clock midnight, he out the door. Like a little kid. He never wants to just sit down and be a father.
Okay, there was a period of time that Mr. Berry was incarcerated, correct?
Yes.
After, I believe it was in 2012, after his release.
2013.
13, thank you. Did he come to visit with his kids?
Well, first he sent a letter. He mailed a letter somewhere around in April, and he asked me to come see him. He was on a tether, and at that time, he couldn't leave at all. So I took Matthew over there, and we used to go over there a lot. Actually, I'm the one that even used to go to the grocery store for Stephen. So when he said that I never left him alone with Matthew, that's a lie. They were there for multiple times, over 2 hours with each other. On the Vinewood. We used to always go over there and spend a night.
When he was released, how long was he on tether, if you recall?
I think he got off a tether, totally off a tether, August, but before that, he actually got time out. Like, you had to be in the house, like, I want to say maybe 3 or 4. He had to be back in the house or something. He had to be on a work release thing, so he would actually come over to the house every once in a while. You see what I'm saying? So, how many times he asked about Stephen? I didn't have to keep saying Stephen was at my aunt, Stephen was at my aunt. He didn't ask about him like that. That wasn't Stephen's way. That's not how he is.
When he was off tether, did he increase his parenting time?
No, you barely saw Stephen. I remember when I first tracked back up to Stephen, actually Stephen Berry's attorney, who she called Victoria Johnson, she actually took me out to Stephen Berry, well, in Redford, where he's living right now on, I want to say, 2014, August 6th. I definitely remember that. I couldn't find him. I know Matthew's birthday was coming up August 18th, and I wanted to find him, like, where are you? Are you going to be there for Matthew's birthday? he was home. Me and him started walking. He thought Maxie's birthday was on August 16th, like he always did. But he was telling me, oh, I was out of town. And I'm trying like, what do you mean out of town? Basically, since Stephen's a womanizer, when he even in his own testimony said he went to Georgia with a friend. No, he went to Georgia to meet up with a female that he met online to have sex with for a month. That's
Thank you. Questions have been asked with regard to your relationship with your aunt, Miss Ford. What type of relationship did you have?
My aunt is like a really loving person, and I don't appreciate Stephen Berry's lawyer trying to attack her character. What I will...
Michelle, just my question, okay? What type of relationship do you have with your aunt?
It was kind of difficult for her.
Relevant to the question, Your Honor. What does this have to do with the best interest of
Well,
your right?
as Ms. Anderson herself was going into it, trying to somehow slander the reputation of Ms. Gordon, we have a right to go back and ask the person who she was saying that allegedly Ms. Gordon should have known something. I can build into this for the best interest of where we believe the children should be as to what Ms. Gordon knew or didn't know and what the relationship between Ms. Gordon and Ms. Blair was.
Well, the aunt is a proposed long-term placement, so to the extent it's supposed to best interest, it's okay.
Thank you. What was your relationship with your aunt?
At one point, it was really good, but I can be honest about this fact. My auntie knew nothing, okay? And I actually purposely made it that way.
Okay, you ask questions. You can't do a narrative with the court is ruled, okay? When did your relationship with your aunt change?
After I found out about what Stephen was doing.
Okay. And can you give me a time period for that?
That was in August. That was in August of 2012.
Okay. And how did your relationship change?
Well, I basically stopped talking to my aunt, period. At one point, she used to come over every day. That's how she was. Like, she loved us. She loved all of us. Like, she checked for us. If one wasn't there, she looking like, hey, where they at upstairs? She loved all of us. And I knew if anybody would know anything was wrong, it would be my aunt. So I purposely kept her away, meaning I was just nasty to her for no reason. You get what I'm saying? And it hurt her. That really hurt her because I know she missed me, she missed the kids, but she never stopped coming. She would knock on the door. Sometimes I would open the door like, what? You get what I'm saying? And it hurt me to do that to her because I love that lady, you know? But I made her feel basically like she couldn't come. You get what I'm saying? But one thing I didn't have to do is I didn't have to do that with Alexander Dorsey and Stephen Berry because they were never around anyway.
Okay.
So that's why I took extra care to be that way with my aunt because she was the only one that would really know that something was not right. From the moment she walked in their house, she was looking for everybody. She loved us. The only person in my entire life who's ever loved.
Now, your two children, Gabrielle and Matthew, are placed with your aunt. Do you believe that that's in their best interest?
That would be in the best interest of any child to be placed in their home. My auntie is one of the people, and my Uncle Daryl, she's just one of those people who just does what she's supposed to do, like just down to very small things, like her ethics, her work ethics, just everything about her. For instance, I was playing around with Gabi one day. You know how you pat somebody on the back of the head? Like, I think Gabi said something to me. We were just joking around with each other, but she thought it was too rough, so she grabbed Gabi and she hugged her and rubbed the back of her head. Even though she knew me and her was playing, she goes, oh my God, don't worry. What is up? You know, just she's real gentle. It's whatever needs to be met.
You listened to the testimony of Dr. Henry this morning and the extensive needs of both of your children. Do you think your aunt could provide for those needs?
She most definitely can. Whatever needs to be done, I don't care if she had to ride out to Timbuktu, she would get there. Auntie Angie would break her neck because as of right now, I know it's killing her inside because she's very worried about their future. And I know what's got her the most is she want to make sure their heads are going to be right, basically, so they won't turn out like me. You know what I mean? My auntie is a very gentle person. She's even-tempered. There's no other place for them to be. And I'm in prison, so I don't understand what's the objection to them being with my aunt. It's not like they're going to have communication with me. I'm in prison. You understand what I'm saying? My aunt is not. She's as pissed at me as everybody else is. Believe that.
Okay.
She wants what's best for them in the worst way.
Okay, Michelle, those are the questions I have for you. The other council may have questions, okay?
Can I also just say something? Because this is about my character, right? For the best interest.
Ms. Blair, just wait. Well, the other attorneys will have questions for you. We're going to go around. So, Ms. Macy's going to be last, so we'll go around the table. Ms. Anderson, we'll start with you.
Should I stand here or over there?
Probably where Ms. Burns was, so that Ms. Blair can see you.
Okay.
And
Ms. Blair, can you see me?
I see you and I hear you.
Are you asking the court to take your advice on what's best for your children?
What do you mean by that?
Do you want the court to follow your advice on the best interest of your children?
I want them to do what they're setting out to do, is put them where the best place is for them to be.
Okay.
It's not just my advice, it's a fact.
You know what the best place for your children is that right?
Say it again?
Do you know what's in your children's best interests?
I know for sure it's not me, but I also definitely know it's my aunt and my Uncle Daryl. Actually, if I had been in their care coming up as a child, I wouldn't be sitting right here today.
Do you believe you know what's in your children's best interest as to where they should live?
Yes, I do.
that was just the question I was asking.
She answered yes, Your Honor. Did you believe it was in your children's best interest to beat them, torture them, and kill Stoney and Stephen?
Stoney and Stephen, that's a different subject. So we're talking about Matthew and Gabrielle right now in the best interest. So we're just gonna stick with that, right? See, now I know what you're doing. You're trying to go to my credibility. I just said I've admitted to every wrong thing that I've done. Yes, I'm a violent.
Move to strike
Ms. Blair, you just need to listen to their questions. We're going to go all around the table. We're going to finish that with your lawyer, Ms. Burns. You just need to answer their questions as we go around. Ms. Anderson,
Okay.
Do you believe it was in Stephen and Stoney's best interest to beat, torture, and kill them?
They were raping my son, so I think we know the answer to that.
Do you believe it was in Gabrielle and Matthew's best interest to beat them?
It definitely is not. That shows as a reflection of how I am. That was not in their best interest.
Do you believe it was in your children, Gabrielle and Matthew's best interest to witness you killing at least one of your children?
The one that was raping him for years?
Did you understand my question?
I understood your question. Did you understand my answer?
Your Honor, move to strike on the content.
Well, you understand, she engaged in the dialogue, Mrs. Blair was dialoguing back with her.
This is question and answer. This is not a conversation.
The point is, it was not responsive, but the point is, Ms. Anderson, is that we're here for what is the best interest of Gabrielle and Matt, not what is the best interest of the children.
Okay. Did you believe it was in Gabby and Maddie's best interest to you witnessing you kill at least one of your children?
I don't know, Judge, this line of questioning is not relevant. Mother already stated that she knows her rights are going to be terminated, so I don't know where this line of questioning is going. It really has no bearing.
This is completely irrelevant. The mother's up there testifying that she knows what's in the best interest of her children. And I'm allowed to attack that credibility, Your Honor.
You can take this credibility, but the point is, the issue on the table is whether or not it's in the best interest of Gabrielle and Matthew that the parental rights of the two fathers in this Blair be terminated. The other things that happen don't come into the equation.
I'll move on, Your Honor. You indicated that Mr. after he was released in 2013?
No, not a regular basis.
Did you say you brought him over, Matthew, over to see
Yes,
him?
I did.
Okay, how often?
Yes, I did.
How often?
Most of the time, I want to say we actually were there without leaving for a week and a half. And after that, Matthew said he wanted to go home. So I took Matthew home. Stephen Berry would always ask me to come back. So I went back. But there was never consistency with Stephen Berry and Matthew. He barely even talked to him.
And you said there were times when you left Matthew alone with Mr. Berry?
Yes, I did. When I went to the grocery store, Stephen Berry.
All right, so you weren't concerned about leaving Matthew alone with his father?
No, I was not. I was the only one abusing them. I never accused them of abusing their kids. I just said they were never there. They were deadbeats.
Is it true that after Mr. Berry was off the tether, where he could travel about freely, did you restrict him or say he couldn't come into your home?
Not true. Actually, he was there for a couple days, like I said earlier. He asked about Stephen once, that was it. And he used to come over because our house was close to whatever workforce program that the parole thing obligated him to go to in the morning. So he would come to my house and then leave there in the morning. That only lasted for less than a month. And even when he was there, it was never about Matthew. I never stopped him from coming to see them, ever. He just disappeared.
When he asked about Stephen, what did you tell him?
And just like Sony was at my aunt's.
I'm sorry, repeat that? I didn't hear that.
I told him that he was at my aunt's.
All right, so you lied to him.
Yes, I did.
All right.
Did he push it? No, he did. He asked me once.
Do you know the difference between a truth and a lie?
Objection, Your
I
Honor.
just told you I lied. But
Okay, I'll move on. Did you tell the school that Gabrielle and Matthew were not going to attend because you were moving?
I did.
And was that true?
I know the difference between truth and a lie. I definitely lied.
Okay.
I told them that we were moving because Stephen was dead. In September school will be starting. So, yes, I'm pretty sure they would have been looking for, like, why is Stephen missing school. So, yes, I told them that we weren't coming back because I was moving. So trying to blame the school, it had nothing to do with the school. I actually went through all the proper channels to drop them also. So it has nothing to do with the school. The fault is blamed on me. That's it. I know what I did. I'm admitting to everything I did. But you will not try to blame me for them deadbeats not being there.
Did you tell your friends, Ms. Johnson and Mr. Martin, that Stephen and Stoney were upstairs because they didn't like to be around other people?
I did. I can answer that. I did.
I'm going into the witness's credibility, Your Honor, and I'm pointing out lies you told. I don't see how that's not relevant to somebody's credibility if I can show that there's lies in the past.
Your Honor, the court has already ruled that the best interest of Gabrielle and Matthew is totally different with regard to the death of Stoney and Stephen. So all of this goes to that. Yes, it is inflammatory. Yes, it makes her look bad. But she's already admitted.
Ms. Anderson's point is that she's trying to attack her mother's credibility as to her opinions regarding Mr. Dorsey and Mr. Berry. They're showing that the mother was untruthful in that situation.
That's correct.
The mother has already admitted that she was untruthful in some instances, such as she just lived in a living schooling situation. I don't know the name a lot more, but I'll give you a little latitude, but I think it's apparent. The mother's already admitted that she was untruthful in certain situations.
And truthful in the most in terms of what she did.
I'm not in favor of that.
Okay, Mr. Gabi, it's one minute.
Ms. Blair, after Stoney died, what did you tell Gabi to say to Mr. Dorsey if he asked where Stoney was?
Come on.
No questions, Your Honor.
questions. If you don't understand one of mine, let me know and I'll rephrase it, okay?
Okay.
Okay. In terms of Mr. Berry, after he was released from prison in April of 2013, up until March of 2015, how many times did he ask about Stephen?
I can count on my one hand.
Did you always inform him that he was at his aunt's?
Yes. He would say, is he still over there?
Did he ever probe the issue, meaning demand to see Stephen?
No, that's never how he was. Stephen has missed, I don't even have to say how many he's missed. Let me tell you how many birthdays he's been there for. 2. He was only there for 2 of Stephen's birthdays. That's it.
What about Maddie's birthdays? How many birthdays was he there for Maddie?
One. Just one birthday. And when I used to say that he should talk to Matthew more, because Matthew used to have a really deep list, it was hard to understand what he said. Stephen Berry's words, that little nigga be alright. He's like, I can't understand what he's saying. What's the point in talk? I can't understand him. So no, he never talked to him. Anytime he came to the house, it was always me he was gravitating around. That's it. And when Stephen would pick Matthew up, Matthew would try to swing on his arms to reach back for me. He didn't know him.
In terms of after Mr. Berry was released from prison in April of 2013, you indicated that there were times he actually came to your house?
Yes.
And he actually stayed there for a month?
Basically, not a month. I'm talking about on Vinewood is when we used to go over there.
Right, but I want to talk about after he was released from prison in 2013. He came to your house where Stephen and Stoney's bodies were, correct?
Yes.
Okay, and did he ever ask to see Stephen when he
That
came
was
to
not
your
what.
house?
Can you repeat that? I was talking when you were talking.
The times after he was released from prison, Mr. Berry, and he came to your home, did he ever, once he was inside your home, go upstairs to look for Stephen or anything of that nature?
No.
How many times?
Even when.
How many times would you say he had been to your house after he was released from prison up until May of 2015? Or March of 2015, excuse me.
I want to say 5 or 6, and some of 5 or 6, and some of those were consecutive days, back to back.
What I want to ask you, because was Mr. Berry ever in your home in 2015?
No.
Was he in your home December of 2014?
December?
Yes.
No.
No. Okay.
No.
All right.
No, nobody. We've never seen Stephen on the Christmas, even when they were alive. And when he said that he spent his money, I sent Stephen $470 while he was incarcerated. He never even wrote Stephen once or responded back to any of Stephen's letters. Stephen sent him 8 letters. Stephen never wrote anything back to him. He never bought a phone card. All he did, he basically, those tattoos that he has, a tattoo on his neck and on his chest, he got those while he was in prison. That's what he used the money for that I sent him. Not to get phone cards, to get prison tattoos and keep his hair braided and get snacks. That's what he spent the money on. We had no contact with him the whole time he was incarcerated. So when he says that he spent every bit of his he spent every bit of his money on commissary.
Just wait for the next question.
In terms of Mr. Dorsey, after Stoney's death in 2013, did he ever ask about her?
Yes.
Okay, and what did you told him that she was at Iraq?
Yes.
And he
He never pushed. Yes.
Did he ever come to your house after she was murdered?
Yes. And he even said that in a news interview. He would sit, our table was by the freezer, he would sit at the table with me and Gabi, or just Gabi, and they'd talk for a minute. He didn't come a lot, but yes, it wasn't like he come in looking for Stoney. Like I said, the only one that I felt that I had to really push away was my aunt, because she's the only one that would have known something was wrong. I didn't have to do that with Stephen and Alexander, because they wasn't going to push, and I know that.
Hang up one moment, Your Honor. Judge, I don't have any further questions.
Mr. Burns, are you there?
I have no further questions, Your Honor. I have no comments back over there.
All right, thank you, Ms. Blair. We're going to take a brief recess and then we'll get a pick up on statement. So let's go through it. Ms. Mason, you want to Does everyone think you're on the close?
Judge, at the best interest portion of a neglect case. As the court knows, there's various factors the court can consider in determining whether termination of a parent or parent's rights is in a child's best interest. And the court can look at factors including the parent's current ability to parent or provide for the child or children, the parent's ability to provide stability or permanence, the need of the child or children for that stability, that permanence. The court also can look to the bond between a child and the parent. And one of the factors that is also mentioned is the child's need for finality, which is also another word for stability, for permanence. Burden of proof, as the court knows in this hearing, is preponderance of the evidence. Witnesses on behalf of the department did not even need to be placed on the record today. The court could have made that determination, a best interest determination, without any witnesses being called here today, based upon all the evidence it heard during the trial in this case regarding statutory grounds for jurisdiction and statutory grounds for termination. I would submit to the court that, based upon all the evidence the court heard during the initial trial, meaning jurisdictional and statutory grounds for termination, the court had all the evidence it needed to find that termination of all the parents' rights were in Gabi and Maddie's best interest. At this point, this is a proceeding where the court is, if it terminates, which I submit the evidence has shown needs to happen by preponderance of the evidence, the court is simply legally affirming what each of these parents have done in the past years. They forfeited their rights to their children. Mitchelle Blair did, Alexander Dorsey did, and Stephen Barry did. They relinquished those rights. They forfeited those rights years ago. So any ruling by this court saying that termination is in the children's best interest is simply a legal confirmation of these parents' action on the part of Mitchelle Blair and inaction on the part of the father. These children, Maddie and Gabi, are entitled. They are deserving of a fresh start, a break, a separation from all those people, all those things that caused them the abuse, the trauma, the torture, the neglect. And all three of these people, these three parents, using that term again loosely, contributed to their abuse, their trauma, their torture. Mother directly and the fathers indirectly by failing to protect. And this court has already ruled that they failed to protect Gabi and Maddie. The court has ruled that these fathers failed to protect their children. And these children, as I stated, are entitled to a new start, a break from anything associated with that trauma. And that's what termination of their fathers, of their mother's rights would give them. I recognize that in a best interest hearing, the court's decision has to address each child individually. So with respect to Mitchelle Blair's parental rights and Gabi and Maddie, her rights being terminated to them, the reasons are collective. They are the same for both these children. Not a lot of time needs to be spent in terms of Mitchelle Blair. She herself told this court, I shouldn't have rights to my children based upon my action. The perpetrator of the abuse acknowledges she should have no legal say, no legal right to her children. So the same logic, the same reasoning applies for Gabi and Maddie with respect to Mitchelle Blair. They witnessed horror upon horror, lived in a continuous state of terror, of fear, of anxiety because of their mother. based upon Dr. Henry's reports, and I'll indicate which one I'm referring to, Mitchelle Blair's parent assessment report. Dr. Henry, the expert, stated that termination of Mitchelle's parental rights to both children is strongly recommended. He also stated on the record that he believed termination of her rights was necessary, was in these children's best interests. In terms of the fathers, then, that brings us to Stephen Berry and Alexander Dorsey. Well, their situations are similar, too. They're similar in the sense that both of these fathers failed to protect. Both of these fathers were disinterested in taking an active role in their children's lives. Both of these fathers currently are not in a position to care for their children, financially or emotionally. Neither of these men can provide either of these children the support, the stability, the permanence that they need. Now, I recognize that there's going to be arguments about Gabi's age. Gabi's 18 years of age. Why are we terminating her rights when she legally is an adult? Judge, the fact that she became an adult 4 days ago does not change the fact that this man, in the eyes of the law, should not have rights to his child. 4 days ago, when this petition was filed, there were grounds, and this court found that there were grounds to terminate his rights. Nothing about that has changed. In fact, we've heard more evidence, more testimony as to why his rights should be terminated. There is absolutely no bond between Mr. Dorsey and between Gabi. There's been no relationship. She wants nothing to do with him. She doesn't even want to visit with him. And the court asked Dr. Henry, what are the risk factors if his rights aren't terminated? And I have to acknowledge what Dr. Henry said. Dr. Henry said there are no risk factors. But again, I bring the court back to the factors the Court of Appeals, the Supreme Court, has looked at. Bond, stability, finality, ability to parent. You can't ignore certain things, meaning would the child be at risk of harm if returned to his care, but you also have to look at all of these factors together. And simply because there's no risk factor doesn't mean that there is no legal basis, there's no preponderance of the evidence to terminate his rights. That termination is not in his best interest, because doing so would be ignoring Gabi, her desires, what she stated in terms of wanting a relationship with him. Gabi, as is Maddie, is deserving of this court saying, you didn't take a role in your child's life, you didn't want to have any say in her life, and the court, in the eyes of the law, you should have no rights to your child. In terms of Mr. Berry, you heard Dr. Henry's testimony regarding the needs of Maddie. Maddie needs a lot. He needs a lot of help. He needs a lot of support. Mr. Berry cannot provide that. He can't even, as Mr. Dorsey can't, they can't even provide for their own needs. They can't. How are they supposed to help provide either financially or emotionally or any type of support for these two children who have gone through an incredible, almost indescribable trauma? In terms of Maddie, he needs a placement where he has that stability, where he can progress and be nurtured. That is not what Mr. Berry can provide him. You heard from Miss Anthony's, although there are visits and he shows up, the interaction is minimum at best. Playing on the phone. This is a man who hasn't seen his child on a regular basis. Instead of engaging with his son during the 1 hour he gets with him, he introduces a phone. That is not a man who shows any type of desire that he wishes to engage or nurture or parent his child. And I find it absurd, and I'm sorry, I find it absurd that these two men who've taken no role in their children's lives, didn't care enough to find out whether two of them were living, now take a united front during Mitchelle Blair's testimony, decide to step outside. We can't listen to her testimony. Well, where were the two of you when these children were being tortured and abused? Where was that united front then? It was non-existent because they didn't care. This record is absent of any type of evidence or any type of testimony that would support these two individuals, these three individuals, keeping the rights to their children. All of the evidence this court has heard would demand that their rights be terminated. And for all of those reasons, I ask the court to terminate their rights.
Your Honor, as Ms. Megacy stated, that the court has to make findings by preponderance of the evidence that it's in the best interest to terminate. Certainly as it relates to the mother, she admits to killing two of her children. The entire record certainly supports that it's in the best interest that the court terminate the mother's rights. By her own admission, she admits that she shouldn't have any rights to her children. I think that the record is very complete. I don't need to go through everything that Ms. Megacy stated or point out all the things that were in the court record. I believe the court should have no problem making that finding. And I would ask the court to terminate mom's rights as to both Gabi and Matthew. As it relates to Gabi, I know the court will probably focus on the fact that she's 18 years old, but I think in this case, the age shouldn't be weighed that strongly, in that there's a number of factors that work against Mr. Dorsey maintaining any parental rights. There's no bond with his child. He has no ability to support her. There's no stability in that relationship. There hasn't been any type of effort over the 18 years to even establish a father-daughter relationship, which is very disturbing. Dr. Henry suggests through his testimony that termination is certainly in Gabi's best interest, even though she's 18. I would submit to the court that Gabi's position is she doesn't want to see her dad, and she doesn't care if the court terminates her dad's rights. Those are her, in my investigation, I have to report that to the court, and I am reporting it to the court. That is her position as we stand here today. So certainly, based on the evidence from the permanent custody trial and the best interest hearing with the lower standards, certainly the court should, and I'm asking that they terminate father's rights to Gabrielle. As it relates to Matthew, he's 8 years old. I will also report to the court that he does like seeing his dad. However, as Dr. Henry reported through his testimony, what he observed was the visit, or not Dr. Henry, but that the worker testified that they were playing video games, and that seems to be the focus, and there's very little interaction. While one might argue that there's a bond there, I would suggest that Dad's trying to create a bond there, and the court can certainly make that distinguishing characteristic in that Mr. Berry has had very little contact with Matthew over the years. I believe Matthew wanted a father figure, and I think the only father figure he really has is the uncle with who he's living with at this time. This child needs permanency. He is with a relative, and I know the court has to consider that, but I believe in this instance certainly termination is appropriate. This child is suffering from PTSD, and quoting Dr. Henry, he's at the crossroads due to his cognitive educational development needs, and he needs the structure, the stability that his father can't offer him. He hasn't presented any plan to care for this child, and I don't believe that in this instance as well that the court should not find that terminate, or strike that. I believe in this instance the court should terminate Mr. Berry's rights, as the evidence certainly supports that.
Mr. kiIIing, has Gabrielle given you an indication as to her willingness to take advantage of services that the court can provide to her?
Yes, Gabrielle wants to participate in services for the things that she has to address, not relating to a relationship with her father. I want to make sure the court understands. She's not asking for family therapy with her dad.
No, I understand. But in terms of whether or not there are independent living services available to her, college services, therapy, she indicated that she would be willing to participate and take advantage of those services.
Certainly, as it relates to education, I know she has a desire to do that. That's very important to her, as the testimony suggested, but I believe she's very committed to that. As to therapy, she recognizes her need for therapy. She knows it's going to be a long process, and she will engage in it. It may take some time, but I believe that she will participate.
Mr.
Tim.
Your Honor, it's already been adjudicated that this court believes my client failed to protect Gabrielle during the ordeals she suffered. That, however, is the past, and the current trajectory of Gabi and Alex is only positive. We have now heard testimony that she's internalized her emotions in order to survive daily life with her mother over the past 3 years, and that she's guarded. The evidence has shown that as a result of mother's actions, Gabi felt sorry for her father and was told to lie to her father. Both father and daughter internalize emotions. Both were afraid of the mother, and as a result, they do not have a good bond. That, however, can be changed. There's only hope and potential between Gabi and her father. Today we are here not to determine how to punish Alex for his omissions, but to determine what is in the best interest of Gabi. And it is in her best interest to maintain a legal parental relationship between the father and his only surviving daughter. Gabi's 18. And regardless of the determination of this court here today, she can choose for herself to have or have not a relationship with her father. Even if this court does not terminate Alex's parental rights, Gabi could still choose to not have a relationship, but I know wholeheartedly that father wants to have one regardless. Dr. Henry, in my understanding of his testimony, did not recommend termination. While marginally convoluted, his recommendation was to keep Gabi with Matthew and their great aunt and uncle for their health and well-being. He saw no potential value for termination. The doctor's report indicates great potential, and Alex is not delusional about their relationship. Alex understands that it will take time and that he'll have to earn every emotion and feeling from Gabi. He supports what is best for her, continuing school and being with Maddie while the ordeal of processing the terror, suffering, and abuse she has been subjected to for the past decade continues. While in the past, Alex has been a passive participant in Gabi's life, outside of the curtain of control and aura of fear created by her mother, there's an opportunity to flourish. Just as the doctor testified, now she can finally form a healthy relationship with her father. A termination today is not a prerequisite for any subsequent action that may have a benefit to Gabi. It's only a permanent decision that has one effect, the punishment of the father. Gabi's indifference towards her father is natural based on their past, but their trajectory, per the testimony of the doctor, is only upwards. It was said in this very courtroom that these matters are too often split into separate elements when they're about the totality of the family and the big picture. And the big picture, then, is that terminating Alex's rights will not help Gabi or help a family survive atrocities, but to punish. And that punishment is in name only. If we are truly here with the family as the focal point of our actions, then there's no need to cripple any potential relationship between Alex and Gabi. It's obvious that healing needs to occur, but time is needed to effectuate that healing. Termination will only serve to hinder any reconciliation and healing efforts. The decision to terminate is permanent, whereas the timelines conjectured by Dr. Henry were generally within the next year. What is the point of taking such a permanent position when things could be healed, per his testimony, in such a short time frame? Why terminate when there are no risk factors to compel termination? There is no practical value, there's no legal or practical effect. It's merely twisting the knife. With regard to Gabi and her father Alex, we believe termination will serve no positive purpose, not convey any worthwhile message, and is not in the best interest of Gabi. Thank you.
Ms. Anderson.
Your Honor, on behalf of Mr. Berry, I ask the court to take temporary wardship as it relates to his son Matthew. Too often we see an empty chair where a father would sit, but not so in this case. Mr. Berry is desperate to keep his parental rights to his son Matthew. He's come to every court hearing, he's gone to the evaluation, he's gone to the visits with his son, he's done everything that's been offered to him. No services were offered to him because this is an initial permanent custody petition. But it's clear that Mr. Berry's actions indicate that he loves his son and wants to plan for his son. Mr. Berry does recognize the needs that his son has. He talked to Dr. Henry, in fact cried to Dr. Henry about the terrors that his sons went through. Told Dr. Henry that he recognized Matthew needs physical, emotional, and financial stability. He recognized the importance of Gabrielle in his son's life. He offered to have Gabrielle live with him and or visit Matthew on a regular basis. To sever the parental rights of my client to his son so that Matthew can live with Gabrielle would be inappropriate. Gabrielle is about to start the 12th grade in the fall and has definite college plans looking at Western Michigan University to become a veterinarian. She's a bright young lady and looking to soar. And most likely in a year's time will be out of the home. We've heard from Dr. Henry and the foster care worker about my client's interactions with his son. They each say that he's appropriate. Dr. Henry reported Mr. Berry giving his son a bear hug as soon as he saw him and being engaged in the activities, maintaining good eye contact, helping his son build something, giving him praise where he should have given him praise, telling his son that his birth was the best day of his life. And Dr. Henry acknowledged that Matthew enjoyed seeing his father and couldn't say for certain, but surmised that he'd like to see his father. We've heard from the foster care worker that for the last 4 months, since Mr. Berry's been allowed regular contact with his son, he's taken advantage of it. She testified that he's visiting his son consistently. She testified that he's appropriate during his visits. She said he brought toys. Yes, he does play on the phone like most 8-year-olds would want to. But she also testified that Mr. Berry helped with homework, that they played basketball, that he was happy to see his father, that he wants to see his father. Your Honor, if this court were to offer my client a parent agency agreement, my client would most definitely comply. In fact, he's already in compliance with a portion of it, even though it hasn't been set forth yet. He visits his son, he's in contact with the worker, and he comes to court. He's more than willing to invest in any therapy that's offered to him, parenting classes, and he recognizes that his son needs the therapy. Since his son has been removed from his mother's care, his son is doing quite well. The aunt gave much information to Dr. Henry, and it's in Dr. Henry's report, that Matthew has no behavioral issues, is a happy child, is able to express himself. The aunt who lives with him indicates that there are no behavioral issues or issues with him expressing his feelings. If the court were to offer my client a treatment plan, we're not asking that Matthew be returned today. We recognize that Mr. Berry has to provide suitable housing and a legal source of income. But it's also clear that if the court were to offer my client a treatment plan, Matthew's placement would not change. He would stay with his aunt where he is, and right now he's doing well, and that would not change. If my client does complete a treatment plan and Matthew continues to do well, the goal would be to reunite them. If my client does not complete his treatment plan or Matthew does poorly, then the agency could always file another petition to terminate my client's right in a supplemental petition. Matthew's thriving when he's in school and therapy and tutoring, and these are all things that my client can provide. I would ask the court to ignore any testimony given by the mother. She clearly has a history of lying when it suits her, and she clearly does not know what is in her children's best interests. My client loves his son and is asking for the opportunity to work on a treatment plan, Your Honor. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Burns.
Thank you. You know, Judge, it's clearly convenient to say, disregard everything that Ms. Berry says because she lies. And I again say, she told the truth on the hardest thing. She's always indicated her inappropriateness with regard to all of her children, most apparently with Stoney and Gabrielle. But let's see what the fathers have done. One of the things that I asked Dr. Henry this morning was from the standpoint of time, that these are not normal children, that Gabrielle is not a normal 18-year-old. Maddie is not a normal child. And he indicated not just 6 months, as people have bantied around, but maybe possibly 12 months. And in that 12 months, he would still have to deal with issues that he hasn't even acknowledged yet, that the therapy hasn't begun yet. This case has been going on, since March, a little bit before that. Mr. Berry's been out of jail since 2013, yet he still doesn't have a job. He still hasn't gone with his education. He still doesn't have independent housing. One of the things that stood out from the trial for me, Maddie is a child that's going to need continuous therapy. But at the trial, I believe it was the questioning of the Assistant Attorney General, Ms. Megacy, why didn't you visit? I didn't have the $1.75 for the bus fare. How is he going to get Maddie anywhere? Assist him with anything. One of the 3 words that stood out of every report that I was provided by Dr. Henry is security, stability, and support. That these 2 children need those 3 things. And I won't reiterate the testimony of the doctor, because I know the court was listening very, intently. But nothing in any of the testimony has been presented that either Mr. Dorsey or Mr. Berry can provide security, stability, and support. One of the things also with Mr. Berry is we find out from at least for me, the first time today, he has another child. What's his relationship with that child? Where is the child? What's the child's name? How's he been visiting with him? Has he supported him? No. He won't even provide the information to the worker. That is another example of how both Mr. Dorsey and Mr. Berry deal. If it's not easy, if it's going to be hard to listen or hard to deal with, we just get up and walk out. In my closing, I suggested what would have happened if there had been a safety net for Mitchelle Blair with regard to some of the issues that she had, some of the rough times she had as a child, and therefore dealing with her own children. The doctor suggested today that if someone had been around, they would have reduced the terror and then, therefore, the trauma that both of these children suffered. It is not an excuse, and I've never made an excuse for Ms. Blair because she has never made an excuse for herself. Contra what the attorney for Mr. Berry wants to say, that she's lying when it's convenient to her. It's not convenient to her. Her telling the truth is the reason for where she is. Her telling the truth is the reason that she indicated to this court it is not in the best interest of her to keep her parental rights. It's in the best interest of her children for them to have what Dr. Henry suggested they deserve. Security, stability, and support. And the one person, the one household that can provide that at this time for both of these children, and they are children, 18 really doesn't matter, it's a number. Both of these children is continue with the Gordons with the termination of all 3 the parental rights, Ms. Blair, Mr. Berry, and Ms. Dorsey, so that these children can hit the ground stable and know they don't have to leave ever. That this firm terra where they're at, terra firma, where they're at, is going to be where they can now set roots and grow. Not that if Mr. Berry decides to do something 6 months, 12 months from now, they have the possibility of being uprooted and torn away and done what with. Your Honor, from the totality of all the evidence that's been presented at both the adjudication and this hearing, I suggest to the court that the court has more than enough evidence to permanently terminate the rights of all three parents in this case.
Yes, Your Honor, and because it's going to be brief, may I stay here with the court like you're reporting? Your Honor, just in terms of Mr. Dorsey and Mr. Berry, I want to make it clear. Counsel says you're severing their rights to their children. These are two men who were never fathers, who were never parents to Gabi or Maddie in any real sense. And I think it's significant to come back because Mr. Devlin said there's some question in terms of what Dr. Henry's recommendation was. So it's important to come back to his recommendation concerning Gabi. This is in Gabi's report. What Dr. Henry states is that termination of parental rights under his recommendation. This is due to the torture and maltreatment that Gabi has experienced most of her life from her mother and the abandonment by the father. Gabi was the protector of Matthew, and her father failed to provide basic physical safety to her, harming her development in innumerable ways, including socially, relationally, emotionally, and psychologically. With regards to Stephen Berry, he states a variety of reasons as to why his rights should be terminated, including he's never been in the parenting role for Maddie. He has neglected to provide for his physical, psychological, emotional, or financial needs during his lifetime. His history as a parent and citizen indicates he's not likely to change to meet Maddie's significant needs. He is in the pre-contemplation to contemplation stage of change. Maddie does not have a relationship with his father that is rooted in nurturing, security, and predictability. Again, coming back to this age issue that Mr. Devlin brought up with respect to Gabi. If that age is not a factor in termination of mother's parental rights, why does it become a factor in termination of a man who failed to protect her? It shouldn't. Mr. Devlin says Gabi may choose to have contact with him. Well, so may Maddie when he's 18. Does that mean that this court shouldn't terminate his rights, his father's rights now? There's been no evidence on this record to suggest that any of these parents should retain their rights. The message that will be sent to these children in terms of Gabi, because again, as I stated, both of these men are equally situated. They both fail to protect. Neither one is in a position to parent. If this court terminates Mr. Berry's rights, but doesn't terminate Mr. Dorsey's rights, what message does that send Gabi? I can't even imagine what message that would send that child. And she may legally be 18, but she still is a child. She just turned 18 4 days ago. In terms of best interest, again, I bring this court back to not only looking at risk of harm factors or risk factors, the bond, the need for finality, for permanence, for stability, the ability to parent. There is no bond with either of these men. There is no permanence that they can give them, either of these children. And both these children, Gabi and Maddie, are deserving of finality. They are deserving of this court saying, I've already said that their rights should be terminated. These are not two men who should have, in the eyes of the law, any legal say over you. They shouldn't have had it 4 days ago, and they're not deserving of having it now.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Baker.
Relevant statutory provision the court considers at this point in the case is under MCL 712A.19b, and that's subparagraph 5, where the child protection law indicates that if the court finds there are grounds for termination of parental rights, which the court has previously found, the court must then find the termination of parental rights is in each child's best interests. And the standard, as counsel has referenced, is preponderance of the evidence. And so the court has had a chance to consider the extensive reports of Dr. Henry prior to today's hearing, because he did file those last week as indicated. And his reports, which essentially supplement the testimony that he has given today, reflect a number of things. First, with respect to Mr. Dorsey and Gabrielle, he recommended continued placement of Gabrielle with the great aunt and uncle. At that point, he did not, did not recommend termination of rights based on Gabrielle's age, but he indicated today that was based on his understanding that, the court would not terminate rights for a child that's 18. But he did note in his report that there may be a need, excuse me. He noted, though, in his report that there may be a need for Gabrielle to reconnect with the father at some time in the future in the course of her own therapy. His observations regarding Mr. Dorsey were that Mr. Dorsey's passive. He was interested in Gabrielle's welfare, but his role as a father was limited. Dr. Henry indicated the father's role was minimal in Gabrielle's life. There are issues of betrayal. His recommendation was for both Gabrielle and Maddie to remain with the great aunt as a placement. That trauma treatment would be necessary. He recommended once again today termination of both father's rights and the mother's rights. But he also indicated that Gabrielle does not want to see her father at this point. She was angry at him. He indicated the interaction in the clinical interview between the two of them was awkward, uncomfortable, had to be terminated early. Get my voice back. And Dr. Henry's quote today was that Gabi essentially views the father as just another human being. She does not feel close to him, not as a father and daughter relationship. He was just another person in her life. Now, we specifically asked Dr. Henry, and this has been noted in closing arguments, regarding his recommendation regarding Mr. Dorsey, because his recommendations were inconsistent between his reports and what he recommended today. And he indicated today that he recommended termination of Mr. Dorsey's rights because he said while there are no risk factors that Mr. Dorsey presents to Gabrielle, that there is a message to be sent in the termination, given Mr. Dorsey's lack of support, parenting, and involvement in her life. Dr. Henry indicated that regardless of whether the court terminates Mr. Dorsey's rights or does not terminate Mr. Dorsey's rights, Gabrielle's likely to make her own decisions down the road as to what the relationship would be between her and her father, along with whether or not her father's needed in any therapy that she might need. And so the court has to consider a couple of issues. One issue that the court has to consider under the Mason case is termination of the parental rights of mother and the two fathers in the best interest of the children, notwithstanding the fact that the children are placed with a relative. And our Michigan Supreme Court has set forth a number of criteria that the trial courts are supposed to consider in determining whether termination is still appropriate, notwithstanding the fact that a child is with a relative. The consideration for the court essentially is whether another permanent plan is more appropriate than termination. That plan could be guardianship, that plan could be placement with a fit and willing relative. And so some of the things that the Supreme Court is set to look at are the opinion of experts, which we've had today from Dr. Henry, the likelihood of the particular child being adopted, the child's age, the child's wishes, if the child is old enough to express an opinion, whether the child has any special needs, the bond that exists between siblings. And so in considering the criteria laid forth in Mason, the analysis, the best interest analysis, is very different between Matthew and Gabrielle. And the reason that the analysis is very different is because Maddie is only 8 years old. His permanent plan will be adoption. Considering a plan like guardianship for Maddie or just simply placed with a relative is not appropriate for a child of that age, because that would be too many years for that child without permanency, stability, a permanent home. With Gabrielle, adoption would not be the permanency plan. She is 18. She's expressed her interest in going to college. Her permanency plan was what in the law we would call as APLA, a fancy acronym for another permanent planned living arrangement. Typically, most people think of an APLA plan as independent living, where the court would provide services and prepare the child to live independently. Clearly, Gabrielle at her age is not going to be adopted. And so the best interest analysis becomes very different at that point. And while we've had extensive arguments as to what Mr. Dorsey did or didn't do, what Mr. Berry did or didn't do, it's not necessarily 100% about that. It's about what we need to do to achieve a plan for each one of these children. So let's take Matthew's plan first. He's in a stable placement now with a relative, with a great aunt, who has indicated a willingness to provide long-term care, perhaps adoption for Matthew. The mother, in her own testimony, has indicated that she thinks that's a good placement. She certainly does not even express an objection to the termination of her rights. With respect to Mr. Berry's rights, while it is true that Matthew is placed with a relative, if Mr. Berry's rights remain intact, we can never achieve the permanency plan of adoption. The permanency plan would be reunification, as Mr. Berry's counsel argues for. Present Mr. Berry with the treatment plan and allow him to reorient his life in a way that he could provide care for his son. Clearly, that's not an issue with the mother. The mother has a life sentence. She acknowledges she will never be able to plan for Matthew. And so the question becomes, is Mr. Berry's proposal in Matthew's best interests? And the court, in weighing that, even in relation to the fact that Matthew is placed with a relative, has to answer that question, no. We've had testimony regarding Mr. Berry that to this day he remains without housing, he remains without stable employment. Dr. Henry, in his testimony, indicated there's no significant bond to describe between Matthew and his father. He indicated the interaction during the visit was okay, but it lacked structure. For Mr. Berry to come into a position where he could parent Matthew would be way too long at this point. And that would not be in Matthew's best interest. Matthew's best interest is to achieve permanency and stability as quickly as we can, given the extreme needs that he has at this point. So the court concludes that given the testimony, given the considerations in Mason, termination of parental rights for the mother is indicated as certainly in Matthew's best interest. It's also, termination of Mr. Berry's rights is also in Matthew's best interest. That's the only way we can achieve stability and permanency with his plan being adoption. So that's the court's ruling with respect to Matthew. The ruling and the analysis with respect to Gabrielle is very different. As indicated, Gabrielle is 18. And Dr. Henry sums it up very eloquently at the conclusion of his testimony when he stated that he recommends termination of the mother's rights. The mother has a life sentence in prison, so she can not do anything to provide anything for Gabrielle for her lifetime. So he recommends termination of mother's rights. And he recommends termination of Mr. Dorsey's rights, even though there are no risk factors, but to send a message, essentially, that Mr. Dorsey certainly hasn't been a good parent. He hasn't been there for Gabrielle, not just support-wise, but he wasn't there to help her at all during the completely abusive situation that Gabrielle found herself in for years. But the best interest question, in considering what is in Gabrielle's best interest, the court has to consider the nuances that exist in the law. And the primary difference that the court looks at is that if the court terminates the mother's rights to Gabrielle and terminates Mr. Dorsey's rights, the child becomes what we call a permanent court ward committed to what we call the Michigan Children's Institute, which means that Gabrielle can receive continued services until she turns 19. She's 18 right now. So that means that if I terminate both mother and Mr. Dorsey's rights versus just terminating mother's rights, the court has 1 year, essentially, because Gabrielle just turned 18. The court has 1 year to provide her services with respect to college, to provide her services to teach her to live independently, to provide her with the extensive amount of therapy and trauma treatment that she needs. If, on the other hand, the court terminates the mother's rights, but does not terminate Mr. Dorsey's rights, that then means that the child is not committed to what we call the Michigan Children's Institute, and Gabrielle remains a temporary ward of the court. And for reasons that are probably much too long to explain at this point, it means that Gabrielle can remain under the court's jurisdiction and receive services till she's 20. So it's the difference of 1 year of services. If I terminate Mr. Dorsey's rights, it goes without saying that termination of the mother's rights is in Gabrielle's best interest, given the extensive amount of trauma that the mother inflicted and the fact that the mother can't provide anything for Gabrielle at this point. So that goes without saying. But the difference between, at that point, terminating Mr. Dorsey's rights or not terminating Mr. Dorsey's rights means I get to provide services to Gabrielle for 1 year if I terminate his rights. I get 2 years to provide services if I don't terminate his rights. And that, to the court, makes a huge difference in the best interests of Gabrielle. She needs a multitude of services. And that doesn't just include the trauma therapy and the other forms of healing that she needs, according to Dr. Henry. It also includes life skills for her to live independently. She's indicated she wants to go to college, she wants to be a veterinarian. The difference between 1 and 2 years can make a huge difference in terms of the court providing assistance, subsidy, independent living skills to allow her to actually get into college and become settled there. So the court just can't ignore that difference in, I guess, what Dr. Henry and what counsel has argued is in sending a message to Mr. Dorsey. Yes, it has some logic to it, what Dr. Henry recommends, and certainly what the agency recommends. Mr. Dorsey was certainly not there for Gabrielle. The amount of benefit that he could potentially provide to Gabrielle is probably minimal. Perhaps Mr. Dorsey, perhaps things will change for him. We don't know that, but based on Dr. Henry's assessment at this point, there probably isn't a lot, but Dr. Henry did indicate that in the future, in the course of Gabrielle's own therapy, Mr. Dorsey may be beneficial in helping Gabrielle work through those issues. But the bottom line for the court in making the best interest determination is Gabrielle's situation is not going to change. Her practical situation is not going to change whether or not the court terminates Mr. Dorsey's rights. Her plan is going to be independent living. Her plan is not going to be reunification with Mr. Dorsey. The court certainly isn't going to enter any parenting time orders that would force Gabrielle to visit with Mr. Dorsey. As Dr. Henry indicated, she's 18. She's likely to make her own decisions on what the relationship will be between the two of them. Essentially, the only difference that terminating Mr. Dorsey's rights will make in the life of Gabrielle is that she gets cheated out of 1 year of services. And the court doesn't find that that's in her best interest. It's just not. Her plan is independent living, and that will be the plan that the court adopts. And while it may sound effective to send a message to Mr. Dorsey because he didn't step up and provide what his daughter needed, it's different. The bottom line is the court has to look at specifically what benefits Gabrielle the most. And what benefits her the most is getting 2 years of services from the court. So with that, the court's going to find the termination of Mr. Dorsey's rights is not in Gabrielle's best interest. She'll be made a temporary court ward, and we will have a service plan. Ms. Megacy will have a service plan presented for her. The service plan at this point doesn't necessarily have to provide for services to be provided to Mr. Dorsey. But I do want a service plan provided for Gabrielle as to what therapies she'll receive, what educational services she'll receive, what independent living services she'll receive. And we'll set a disposition date for that.
Just for clarification, though, because when you say doesn't necessarily, because as this court knows, given my argument, it's the agency's position that they did not feel that Mr. Dorsey should have services. So when you say not necessarily, does the court want him included in terms of services?
No, because the court is adopting a plan of APLA. for Gabrielle, which means the plan is not reunification, so we're not working on reunification. So, any other matters before we conclude? Vice appellate rights. Obviously, all parties have the right to appeal. That includes you, Mother. So if you wish to appeal, you have to file the request to appeal, and for an attorney to perfect the appeal for you. The limit is very short. It's only 14 days. So perhaps, Ms. Burns, if you can speak to Ms. Blair after the hearing, if she wants to appeal, perhaps you can do the paperwork for her so she doesn't miss the deadline. And
She indicated that she doesn't, but I will.
you can speak to her after the hearing, and certainly Ms. Anderson, Mr. Devlin, you can, if there's any issues for you to appeal, you can certainly do that within the 14-day period. You can discuss that with your clients. And with that, let's set a disposition date to come back for a service plan for Gabrielle. Okay. All right, so we'll do August 12th at 2 p.m. And we're adjourned. The PTR, can we do that on the same date? It needs to be within 28 days anyway. We're going to do the PTR on the same date.
Same time?
Yes. Yes. Today is
Today is the 27th.
Thanks for all your help.
Thank you.